Welcome back to News Talk here on News Channel 8. We turn our attention now to the district's push for representation in Congress, which now appears badly stalled. While advocates like Eleanor Holmes Norton and groups like DC Vote tend to get the press when it comes to voting rights advocacy, they are not the only activists out there. Tim Cooper is executive director of World Rights. He has traveled the globe to make the case for the people of the nation's capital, and he has come up with a new strategy that he thinks may help the cause. Welcome, and thank you very much for coming in. It's great to see you again.
So very good to be here.
Is this the first time you've talked publicly about this new legal strategy that I know you've spent a long time working on?
It is. So this is the premier engagement of the concept. Let me also say that this concept goes back about 15 years. 15 years ago, it occurred to me that if we begin to work the international human rights legal system, that is to prove that the district status is in fact a violation of international law, we might then at a later time be able to bring it back into U.S. courts to prove that our status violates customary international law, which in fact is binding both on state courts and the U.S. Supreme Court.
Let's take the first part of that first. Has that first box been checked, in your view?
It has indeed. It took about 10, 15 years to go around the globe and actually get various human rights bodies, the United Nations, the Organization of American States, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, all of these major international institutions to come on board and declare the status of the district residents as a violation of international human rights standards. That has happened. Now, the question is, what do we do with that?
Because you have traveled to The Hague and other places, right? I say this in the interest of people understanding kind of some of the history, not puffery or you know, being your PR guy. Give us a sense, just briefly, of some of the places you've traveled and the international human rights groups with whom you've engaged.
Right. Well, I've traveled extensively to Geneva, Switzerland, to the United Nations based out of Geneva. I've traveled extensively to Warsaw, Poland, which is the headquarters for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I've also traveled to the UN in New York and various other places to pursue this cause, to make the case. And in fact, over the years, this case was heard, this case was declared favorably on behalf of the district residents, and so now the question is, as I said, what do we do with this gold?
So we have these findings. What would step 2 in this lengthy process look like?
Okay, the concept of this suit is novel. And I did happen to see Mark Plotkin on the way over here, and he said, say something provocative. And I said, Mark, if you would read my treatise, you would understand that this is provocative. And by that I mean that the concept for this lawsuit is to sue the legislatures of the 50 states who have effectively denied district residents the right to a constitutional amendment that would endow them with full congressional voting representation, let alone full autonomous rights. So the idea is to go directly to the U.S. Supreme Court, suing the 50 states, or the legislators of the 50 states, and declare that their reticence to grant us a constitutional amendment is in fact a violation of customary international law, which is binding on both the states and the U.S. Supreme Court.
Would that entail being in 50 capitals, or can one
That's a great question.
legal challenge
Right.
Get it where you hope to be?
That's the idea behind going directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's this legal idea called original jurisdiction, and that allows states to sue other states directly to the U.S. Supreme Court without going through federal court, but directly to the U.S. Supreme Court. So the concept here, because the district is treated as a state, 537 federal statutes declare the District of Columbia to be a state. The Supreme Court has treated the district as a state. Congress has treated the district as a state. For jurisdictional purposes only, to get before the U.S. Supreme Court with this case on universal jurisdiction, we would apply to the U.S. Supreme Court and say, for all intents and purposes, we are a state for original jurisdiction, and we want you to hear the merits of our case.
Will you be, pardon me, don't know why I have a frog in my throat. Will you be moving forward now as a claimant, as a plaintiff, whatever, I'm no lawyer, obviously, whatever the right legal word is? Do you, Tim Cooper, move forward now? Or do you do it perhaps in conjunction with average people, citizens who are not activists in any commonly understood sense, because that's a common strategy.
Yeah.
How do you move forward
This
now?
is a very important and very, very good question. Basically, the District of Columbia would have to file suit. That is, the mayor of Washington, D.C. would have to file suit. So we need the mayor's consent, buy-in, to accomplish this. We need basically 6 people. We need the mayor of the District of Columbia, and we need 5 Supreme Court justices. Now, there are 5 Supreme Court justices currently sitting on the bench, or about to sit on the bench, who support the idea of using foreign law, international law, in U.S. jurisprudence. There are 4 who are definitely against it, but there are 5, and all we need is 5 who are for it. So we think that if the mayor were to file this suit, and if we can get over some of these obstacles of common law immunity and so forth, that we then have only 5 Supreme Court justices to convince. And that, I think, is very different than convincing the entire United States Congress to move ahead with our issue.
Having read some of your material, I want you to restate, because I think it's so central to the thrust of the work you've been doing. You're suing the 50 legislatures rather than a kind of swing for the fences, D.C. versus U.S. or
Right.
D.C. versus Congress.
Right.
D.C. versus the 50 states. I want you to go right at that again.
Yeah, because that is central, that is key. The state legislators are not immune from violating constitutional rights. In other words, if we can prove that they are in fact violating our constitutional rights under the Bill of Rights and under international customary law, they are in fact liable to the courts. Okay, they are subject to the courts. And what we are looking for with the Supreme Court is injunctive relief, not declaratory relief, but injunctive relief, where the Supreme Court says there are violations of international law here, there are violations of Bill of Rights. You, the 50 states, legislators of the 50 states, are hereby commanded to pass or convene a constitutional amendment and pass a constitutional amendment which would provide D.C. residents the rights consistent with statehood, the rights consistent with full and equal political rights.
About 90 seconds left in this segment, maybe a little less. Justices who have referred to international norms, international standards, international law, what have you, have been criticized. Does that hurt the
I don't think so. I think the only thing that matters...
I think that came up in death penalty, if I'm not mistaken.
It did, and I think that was Justice Stevens who wrote that opinion. But I think all we need are 5 justices to make a declaration that our status violates international law. And I think, whether they use international law, whether they use the Bill of Rights, or a combination of the two, I think we have a very, very substantial claim, and potentially this is an important strategy.
Just briefly, in terms of your dealings on the international stage, were folks inclined to be sympathetic to your thrust because they genuinely believed it, or because here's an opportunity to stick it to the U.S., which is always telling everyone else how to behave?
Well, I mean, the rights enshrined under international law are universal rights. So we just simply point to those rights and say, well, we don't have these rights. Help us get these rights and apply these standards. And that's all that we ever did.
Talking with Timothy Cooper, Executive Director of World Rights. We'll pause here. Back with more News Talk right after this. Thanks for staying with us here on News Talk. Bruce DuPoit with you on this Tuesday. In just a moment, we're going to have a major discussion about Cuba with a special focus on when, if ever, the U.S. government is going to lift the long discredited ban on American travel to the island nation. But right now, back to our conversation with human rights activist Tim Cooper of World Rights. If you have a quick question or comment, you're watching us live in the 10 o'clock hour, join us by calling 703-387-1020. We'd love to have your thoughts, your questions, your comments, but dial right away if you want to be part of the conversation. We'd love to have you pick up the phone right now, though, so we can get to you in our time that we have left. Our number here, 703-387-1020. So we talked at the outset about the travel you've done, and obviously a lot of research involved in the District of Columbia and its unique status in terms of congressional representation. By the way, let me cut to some one other thought real quick. A lot of the thrust has been a vote in the House. You fully believe and are seeking a vote in the House and 2 senators. The whole enchilada, full congressional representation, correct?
Well, thank you for that, because that has been my intention all along. Full congressional representation as well as full local autonomy. Very important ideas. So we're looking for, as you say, the whole enchilada.
Do any capitals in the world, based on research, treat its citizens the way the U.S. treats 600,000 people in D.C.?
I believe the answer to that is no, and that's a very, very important element of proving customary international law violations. And currently we are doing a massive 194 state survey of the legal status of voting rights for the residents of every capital city in the world, as well as the populations within those countries. And we are seeing in Latvia, for instance, in Kiev, Ukraine, in Kiribati, in Oceania or Tuvalu, all of these countries, large and small, provide their residents with equal and full voting representation in their own national legislatures. And if we conclude the survey and conclude that the vast majority, and I think it will be pretty much unanimous, but the vast majority of these countries provide these rights to the residents of their nations, then we will have proven or gone a very, very long way to prove customary international law violations in the District of Columbia.
Why do you think the U.S. does not?
Why do I think that? Evidently, it's a political issue, a partisan issue. There may be taints of racial considerations, laziness, complete political lethargy. One reason why we're going after the legislatures is because they failed to ratify a constitutional amendment back in 1978, which would have granted D.C. residents full and equal voting rights in the U.S. Congress. They failed to do that. 16 out of the requisite 38 states passed that constitutional amendment, and we were left abandoned.
Sometimes the courts will say that if, and I'm generalizing of course, but sometimes the courts will say that if there's a fix in the political branches, sorry, we hear what you're saying, but you've got these other avenues, pursue them.
Yeah, well, my question back to the court would be, well, what fix, when, and where will that fix take place? Because we've just been through 7 years, 7 really long, fruitless years of trying to achieve a vote in the House. That has not happened. It will not happen. Before that, it was statehood legislation in 1993. Before that, it was a constitutional amendment. Before that, there were countless bills introduced into the Congress trying to move this issue. Before Congress, none of that happened. 200 years have gone by. 208 years have gone by. Still hasn't happened. Where do we go for relief? Where is our effective remedy? We say to the courts, you are our only remedy, U.S. Supreme Court. We ask you to hear our case.
This is an election year in the district. Is this an important moment for us to get the candidates for mayor, incumbent and otherwise, to commit to pursue the legal strategy you've outlined?
I can't think of a better question, and the answer is positively yes. Both Mayor Fente and mayoral candidate Vincent Gray need to look at this strategy, need to embrace this strategy, and commit to it, to pursue it come the end of the election cycle. And I certainly would hope they would. And we will have, led by a team of very enterprising and talented law students, a brief within the next several weeks. Stacy Roars and Alicia Krantz are working hard on this, and I think we'll see some very, very positive results soon.
Timothy Cooper is Executive Director of World Rights. Thank you very much for coming in. Thank you for discussing this important issue here first, and please keep us up to date on any progress. Come back anytime.
I will indeed. Thank you, Bruce.
Tim Cooper, thank you very much. Up next, after our break, much more, Thomas Bilbao, head of the Cuba Study Group. Don't go away.